Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about another method for solving a quadratic equation, and that method is the quadratic formula. Now I think you've seen it before, but just in case it's new to anyone, let's go over what it is. It says the solutions of this quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, are x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And the biggest thing to note are that these letters here, a, c, and b, those are just the coefficients of a quadratic equation written in standard form, meaning it has to equal 0. Okay? Before we go over some examples, I want to give you a little way to help you memorize this quadratic formula, if you didn't know it already. Okay, I know a lot of times we complain about how difficult it is to memorize, but let me just quickly show you this clip. Let's see if I can get it in here. Which shows you that I'm pretty sure anyone could memorize this formula. Okay, take a look at this.
X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2.
So, I mean, you can see that even a 4 or 5-year-old can remember this formula, so I expect you to also be able to remember it, and even more than that, be able to use it. And that's what we're going to go over here. Okay. Alright, so example 1 gives us, it says solve 3x squared plus 8x equals 35. Now the first thing to remember is that the quadratic formula only works if it's in standard form, meaning it equals 0. So in order to make this equal 0, I'm going to subtract 35 from both sides. So now that is equal to 0, and I've got my quadratic, 3x squared plus 8x minus 35. Okay, so now I can clearly see my a, my b, and my c values. Okay, so I'm going to write that down. A equals 3, b equals 8, and c equals negative 35. So I'm going to rewrite the quadratic formula. Even though I know it's right up there, sometimes writing things a lot helps you remember them. So I'm going to rewrite it, and I would encourage you to do the same. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Right? And then I'm going to take the a, b, and c values that I found, and I'm going to substitute them in. So we've got x equals negative. Anytime you're substituting in numbers, use parentheses. So it's negative, and then my 8's in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of, once again, parentheses 8, and then the square, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 35. And that's all divided by 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, now the harder part of this tends to be actually simplifying this. Alright, so I'm going to do a couple steps by hand, and I'm also going to use my calculator for a couple steps. So negative 8, I know that's negative 8. We can do that part. Okay, and I know the square root's still there because I haven't done anything to it. But in order to figure out this part underneath, oops, lost a parenthesis there. This part underneath the square root, I'm actually going to use my calculator. Alright, so I'm going to type this part, let me highlight it for you, that part into my calculator. So let's see if you can see that. There we go. I've got parentheses 8, close parentheses squared, minus 4, parentheses 3, close parentheses, parentheses negative 35. The reason I like to do this in my calculator is because sometimes we forget about those extra negatives and we mistakenly subtract when we should be adding. Our calculator helps us prevent doing that. Alright, so I've got 484, so that means we have a 484 underneath the square root, and 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, now I always check to see if what the number underneath my square root can be simplified exactly. Meaning, is the square root of 484 a whole number? And look at that, it is. That always makes our lives a little easier. So, square root of 484 is actually 22, so this is negative 8 plus or minus 22 divided by 6. Now, when you get to this part, these are all numbers, meaning they're all like terms. Alright, so I'm going to split this up into the plus version, which would be negative 8 plus 22 divided by 6, and the minus version, negative 8 minus 22 divided by 6. Alright, so now here, notice it's this whole thing divided by 6, so I'm going to add these together first, which is 14 divided by 6, and then we always simplify our fractions. So that's really 7 divided by 3. So there's one answer. Alright, notice how it's not a decimal, it's a fraction. We like fractions better. Well, you may not, but your teachers do. Alright, negative 8 minus 22 is negative 30 divided by 6, and that's going to be negative 5. So here are our two answers. Alright, two answers we get are x equals negative 7/3 and x equals, positive 7/3. Whew, that was close. Positive 7/3 and negative 5. Two answers, done. See, it's not so bad. Let's try example 2 now. Alright, once again, we got to get this in standard form, meaning it has to equal 0. Doesn't matter which ones you move over, but I always like to keep my x squared positive, so I'm going to leave that over there, and I'm going to subtract 12x to get rid of it and add 5. And whatever we do to one side, we're going to do to the other. So 0 equals x squared minus 12x, and then combine these like terms here to get plus 18. So now that it's in standard form, I should be able to recognize my a, b, and c. Remember, when there's no number here, that's really a 1. So I've got a equals 1, b equals negative 12, and c equals positive 18. So we're going to plug them into the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So once again, plug them in with parentheses, and be careful that you write everything down correctly. Minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So once again, I'm going to do part of this by hand. Negative 12 is positive 12, plus or minus the square root. And then again, I always like to type this part in my calculator. You don't have to, but I would suggest it. Negative 12 squared minus 4, parentheses 1, parentheses 18. 72. Okay. So we got 72 all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Alright, now we should hopefully know that the square root of 72 doesn't come out nicely, and that should tell you that we need to simplify the square root of 72. Meaning, break it down, use our factor trees. Right, 72, you can check on your calculator, but it breaks up into 12 times 6. 12 breaks up into 4 times 3. 6 breaks up into 3 times 2. I'm going to cross these out so I don't get confused. 4 breaks up into 2 times 2. And I believe that's all. So I got a pair of 2's and I got a pair of 3's. So that means 1 2 and 1 3 come out. And 1 2 is left underneath. 2 times 3 is 6. So this is really 12 plus or minus 6 root 2 divided by 2. Now, we're not quite done yet, because, remember, I'm dividing this whole thing by 2. So I can actually simplify this a little more. If it helps, think of this as 12 divided by 2 plus or minus 6 root 2 divided by 2. Right? I'm dividing both of these pieces by 2. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. And 6 root 2 divided by 2, well, I can only divide these two numbers, so that is 3 root 2. So that brings me to my final, completely simplified answer of 6 plus or minus 3 root 2. Boom, done. Alright, so that one had a few extra steps. Just make sure you simplify it as much as possible. Okay? Alright, let's try example 3. Go ahead and flip your page over. So once again, right, notice how we did in all three problems. Don't forget, got to get this in standard form. So I'm going to add this 2x squared over to the other side. So now I've got 0 equals 2x squared minus 2x plus 3. Okay, A, B, and C. So A equals 2, B equals negative 2, and C equals 3. So if I plug that into quadratic formula, again, writing it down because that helps us remember it, and you must remember this. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3. Again, notice the parentheses, need them there, times or divided by 2 times 2. Okay, simplifying this, negative 2 is positive 2 plus or minus. Once again, I would suggest typing that in your calculator. I already did, so I'm going to help you out here, and that's going to give us negative 20 divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. Now remember, negative numbers underneath the square root, that means this is going to end up being imaginary. So remember, that's like breaking it up into square root of negative 1 times the square root of 20. And what does the square root of negative 1 equal? Come on, I know you know this. That's right, it's I. So I've got I times the square root of 20. And if I factor out 20, 4 times 5, 2 times 2, I got a pair of 2, so that's really 2i times the square root of 5. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2 plus or minus 2i times the square root of 5, all divided by 4. But wait, we're not done yet, because just like in the last problem, we've got to simplify this a little bit. So if we're dividing this whole thing by 4, that means I'm dividing this 2 by 4, and I'm dividing this other 2 by 4. Alright, 2 divided by 4 is 1 divided by 2, so this is really going to end up being x equals 1 plus or minus 1i root 5, all divided by 2. So once again, notice how you need to divide 2 by 4 and this other outside 2 by 4. Don't forget to do one of them or you'll end up with the wrong answer. Alright, then the last thing we're going to talk about today is the discriminant. Okay, hopefully you've heard this before, but in case you haven't, let's review. The discriminant is the expression underneath the square root of our quadratic formula, which is b squared minus 4ac. And what it does is it tells you, or it tells us, the nature of our solutions. Nature of solutions. Meaning it tells us how many there will be and whether they're real or imaginary. Alright, so for example, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, that means it's a positive number. Well, if I have a positive number underneath my square root, then I know I'm going to end up with 2 real solutions. And 2 because of that plus or minus. If my discriminant, or the expression underneath the radical, equals 0, then it's still real, but I'm only going to have 1 solution because plus or minus 0 means the same thing. So the plus or minus isn't really important for that. And lastly, if my discriminant is less than 0, that means I have a negative number underneath my square root, and we know that that means we have imaginary solutions. Alright, and specifically 2 imaginary solutions. Alright, so let's take a look at example 4 then. It says, find the discriminant of the quadratic equation and give the number and type of solutions. Alright, so again, remember, discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And when they say number, that means 1 or 2. And type would be real or imaginary. Alright, so I'm going to try one of these with you, and then I want you guys to do B and C on your own. So in part A, it's already in standard form, so I know my A is 9, B is 6, and C is 1. So if I plug that into b squared minus 4ac, the discriminant, I'm going to get 6 squared minus 4 times 9 times 1. 6 squared is 36. 4 times 9 times 1 is also 36. And 36 minus 36 is 0. So my discriminant is 0. Now remind yourself, what does that mean about the solutions? If the discriminant equals 0, we have 1 real solution. So that's what I would say about the number and type. Alright, so you try B and C on your own, And don't you worry, your teacher's definitely going to check it in class when you next see them. If anything was confusing, take a look at it again. Otherwise, we'll see you soon.